Hello, you're watching Scotland at 7. It's Wednesday the 23rd of March. I'm Hugh Stewart, and today we begin with our Ukraine update. It's day 28 of Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky accused Russian forces of seizing a humanitarian convoy near Mangush, west of Mariupol. Employees of the state emergency service and bus drivers have been taken captive, he said, adding that 100,000 people remained in the city living in inhumane conditions in a total blockade, without food, water, medication, under constant shelling, under constant bombing. Russian forces are now inside Mariupol, a senior US defense official said. Two super-powerful bombs rocked the city on Tuesday, yesterday, even as rescue efforts were ongoing, according to local authorities. Ukraine's armed forces say its military continues to defend the southern port city of Mariupol, as well as Chernihiv, to deter Russia's advance towards Kyiv, according to a report from 8 a.m. this morning. Russia's combat power in Ukraine has declined below 90% of its pre-invasion levels for the first time since its attack began, a senior US defense official said on Tuesday, suggesting heavy losses of weaponry and growing casualties, and describing morale issues, command and control problems, and a reliance on conscripts and a stalled advance to Kyiv. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov refused to rule out the use of nuclear weapons in an interview with CNN on Tuesday. Peskov told the broadcaster that such arms could be used if Russia faced an existential threat. Russia has the world's largest stockpile of nuclear warheads. The Pentagon later condemned Peskov's refusal to rule out the use of nuclear weapons. President Biden flies to Brussels today, where he's expected to announce new sanctions against Russia and new measures to tighten the existing sanctions. The deputy head of Kyiv's police force has accused Russia of using white phosphorus munitions in the city of Kramatorsk in Donetsk. Oleksiy Bisholitsky shared online footage, which cannot be independently verified, of material burning fiercely underneath a pile of aggregate. Another use of phosphorus ammunitions in Kramatorsk, he said. About 300,000 people in the occupied southern city of Kherson are running out of food and medical supplies, a spokesperson for Ukraine's foreign ministry said. Kherson was the first major Ukrainian city to fall into Russian hands since the invasion began on the 24th of February. Russian forces have only 3 days of fuel, food and ammunition left to conduct the war after a breakdown in their supply chains, Ukrainian military commanders have claimed. The statements were described as plausible by Western officials. Russian forces have kidnapped 2,389 children from the Russian-controlled territories of Luhansk and Donetsk, the US Embassy in Kyiv has said, citing figures from Ukraine's foreign ministry. The embassy said this is not assistance, it's kidnapping. The Ukrainian Health Minister Viktor Lyashko said 10 hospitals have been completely destroyed since Russia invaded. Other hospitals could not be restocked with medicines and supplies because of nearby fighting, the minister added. The United Nations will face 3 resolutions today on the worsening humanitarian situation in Ukraine after Russia decided to call for a vote on its Security Council resolution, which makes no mention of its attack on Ukraine. At Thursday's emergency summit, NATO countries are expected to agree to provide special kit to protect Ukraine against any chemical, biological or nuclear attacks launched by Russia. Jens Stoltenberg, the organisation's Secretary General, also told Russia to stop engaging in nuclear sabre-rattling and repeated warnings that the Kremlin could be seeking a pretext for using chemical weapons as the war heads into a second month. Mr. Stoltenberg said, I expect allies will agree to provide additional support, including equipment to help Ukraine protect against chemical, biological, radiological and nuclear threats, he said the day before the NATO meeting. The NATO chief declined to spell out exactly what would be supplied, although it's likely to include gas masks and protective suits, But his statement reflects heightened uncertainty across alliance members about Russia's intentions, as the invasion of Ukraine has stalled on multiple fronts. Stoltenberg described Russian comments that it would be willing to deploy nuclear weapons if NATO directly entered the conflict as dangerous and irresponsible. On Tuesday, Dmitry Peskov, the spokesman for Russian President Vladimir Putin, had said that nuclear arms could be used if Moscow thought it faced an existential threat. The Secretary-General acknowledged that NATO was concerned about the possible use of chemical weapons or biological weapons in Ukraine, partly because of false claims that Ukraine, supported by NATO's allies, is producing and preparing these weapons for its own use. No firm evidence has been produced to justify the Russian statements, but Stoltenberg said such accusations may well be a way for them to try in a way to create a pretext for their use of chemical weapons, echoing an almost identical warning made by US President Joe Biden overnight before travelling to Europe. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky will address Biden and the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, plus other NATO leaders assembling in Brussels on Thursday morning via video link, in an emergency meeting to discuss further military responses to the ongoing crisis triggered by Russia's invasion last month. Poland is expected to present a proposal for a multinational peacekeeping mission in Ukraine at that meeting, but there is no support from the US or any other allies for a no-fly zone or any other direct NATO intervention, despite the increasingly bloody fighting. NATO leaders are also expected on Thursday to agree to increase troop deployments on its eastern flank, with the creation of 4 new multinational battle groups in Romania, Bulgaria, Slovakia and Hungary to protect against any sudden Russian attack, alongside those battle groups already established in Poland and in the Baltic states. Ukraine's former president Petro Poroshenko has asked Boris Johnson not to compare the UK's Brexit vote to his country's fight against Russia, saying 0 citizens died because of the decision to leave the European Union. Johnson's comparison, when he suggested that British people backed Brexit with 52% of the vote because they, like the Ukrainians, choose freedom every time, was greeted with disbelief. Downing Street has denied the Prime Minister was seeking to make a direct comparison between the devastation and loss of life in Ukraine and the UK vote to leave the EU. Asked by ITV News about the comparison, Mr. Poroshenko, speaking in military uniform from Ukrainian capital Kyiv, responded, "How many citizens of United Kingdom died because of Brexit? 0. Can you imagine how many Ukrainians died when they met Putin's aggression? Only today we have 150 children killed by Russian soldiers and by Russian artillery. Only during the last week, 2,000 children from Mariupol were captured and delivered back to Russia. Can I ask you, how many houses were destroyed because of Brexit? We have whole cities that were completely erased with this situation. Please, no comparison." A veteran aide of President Vladimir Putin has resigned over the invasion of Ukraine and has left Russia with no intention to return, the first senior official to break with the Kremlin since Putin launched his aggression a month ago. The Kremlin has confirmed that the aide, Anatoly Chubais, has resigned of his own accord. Chubais was one of the principal architects of Boris Yeltsin's economic reforms in the 1990s and was Putin's boss in the future president's first Kremlin job. He later ran a big state business under Putin and held political jobs, lately serving as the Kremlin's special envoy to international organisations. President Biden is flying to Europe today for an emergency NATO summit on Ukraine. The invading Russian troops are stalled, cities are under bombardment, and the besieged port of Mariupol is in flames. 4 weeks into a war that has driven a quarter of Ukraine's 44 million people from their homes, Russia has failed to capture a single major city or to depose the Ukrainian government, while Western sanctions have ostracised it from the world economy. Russian forces have taken heavy losses, been frozen in place for at least a week on most fronts, and faced supply problems and fierce resistance. They have turned to siege tactics on bombardment causing massive destruction and many civilian deaths. Worst hit has been Mariupol, the southern port, completely surrounded by Russian forces, where hundreds of thousands of people have been sheltering since the war's early days, under constant bombardment and with water, food and heat supplies cut. New satellite photographs from the commercial film Maxar, released overnight, showed massive destruction of what was once a city of 400,000 people, with columns of smoke rising from residential apartment buildings in flames. No journalists have been able to report from inside the Ukrainian parts of the city for more than a week, during which time Ukrainian officials say Russia has bombed a theatre and an art school used as bomb shelters, burying hundreds of people alive. Russia denies targeting those buildings. Regulations have been passed to put in place a safe, fast and free vetting system for those who open their homes to displaced Ukrainians. Under the scheme, volunteer hosts will be able to apply for expedited disclosure checks. These enhanced checks will offer the same level of scrutiny as the initial checks carried out for those working with children and vulnerable adults. Sponsors will be contacted as part of the matching service and guided through the disclosure check application process. Children's Minister Claire Hockey said, "The generosity of people who want to open their homes for Ukrainians fleeing the illegal invasion of their country is heartwarming. We want Scotland to be a welcoming and safe haven, and so ensuring the well-being and safety of those arriving from Ukraine, who are overwhelmingly women and children, is crucial. That's why we've taken action to put in place appropriate checks for sponsors and to make sure the checks are free for those who are offering a place to stay." Under this scheme, Disclosure Scotland will prioritise checks for volunteer hosts when they are matched so that the homes are ready for new arrivals as quickly as possible. Now, on economy news, I turn today to the spring financial statement, the mini-budget, delivered by the Chancellor Rishi Sunak in the Commons this morning, or earlier this afternoon. The Chancellor put his remarks in the context of the war in Ukraine, saying that the effects will put a strain on the economy, and in particular on energy bills. On energy, though, in the spring statement, which you can read online, the government announced that they had previously supported the energy bills by, for example, the loan of £200, and therefore there was no reduction in fuel bills in today's announcement. Instead, Mr Sunak wants to see more growth, more productivity and innovation as the way to improve people's lives. He therefore announced investment incentives for firms to increase spending on new equipment and on training. Mr Sunak claims that his government is reducing the tax burden on working people. All that claim is disputed, however, as we will see. However, Mr Sunak pointed out that the hurdle at which national insurance is levied will rise from £9,880 to £12,570 from July, and that brings it in line with the income tax allowance. Mr Sunak said that 70% of national insurance payers will therefore pay less. The Chancellor also announced 5p off petrol and diesel for 1 year, which will save, he said, £100 per annum for a car and more for vans and trucks. Comments on the government's measures, first of all from the government itself. On the spring statement online, the government recognises, and I quote, "Those on the lowest incomes will particularly feel the effects of higher inflation because they have less scope to adjust their expenditure in response to prices, and they tend to spend a greater proportion of their expenditure on electricity, gas and other fuels." Now, in the Commons today, Alison Thulis took up that point on the high price of electricity bills. Here's Alison.
Mr Speaker, I don't know if the Chancellor has ever had a prepayment meter. I don't think they fit them. I don't think they fit them, Mr Speaker, for swimming pools. But 4.5 million people across these islands. She says it's pathetic. 4.5 million people across these islands. 4.5 4.5 million people across these islands experiencing the stress and despair of watching the money run out on their prepayment meters. Prepayment customers, Mr Speaker, already pay higher bills than those in direct debit, and they may struggle even to access the Chancellor's Heat Now, Pay Later loan if it doesn't go automatically to pay back the debts on that meter. Mr Speaker, the Fuel Bank Foundation, who provide top-ups to those who are struggling on prepayment meters, have seen a 75% increase in demand already. That's before the prices we are seeing now.
Yes, that was Alison Thulis, and I'll quote her later on because she's also a press release. But on that point earlier on of criticism of a Chancellor's statement, Prem Sikka, who's in the House of Lords, an independent who's was a professor of accountancy, he points out today that 42% of UK adults don't pay income tax because they earn less than $12,570 per annum, and so any benefit or any tax cuts will have no effect on them, but still they have to pay the higher bills. Other criticism, the Guardian quotes Nick Macpherson, who used to be a senior Treasury Mandarin, and he points out that national insurance rates have actually more than doubled. If you compare it from 1977, when national insurance was about 6% of income, it will be going to just over 13% by 24. The basic income tax rate may well be falling again over the same period. It's fallen. The first rate of income tax has fallen from 34% down to 19% now, same as Scotland. And the overall tax take has actually risen from 31.7% to 36.2% of national income. So just to underline that point, the Chancellor, of course, and the Tories will make much of the tax-cutting claims, but Nick Macpherson and others have pointed out that the overall tax take, that means what we pay in all the taxes across the board, including VAT and excise duties, means that taxes are actually pretty high, at 36% of the GDP. Income tax is also paid to rich people with investments, but it's only workers who pay national insurance. Paul Johnson of the IFS, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, asks, what is the possible justification for cutting income tax rates while raising the national insurance rate? He says this further drives a wedge between the taxation of unearned income and earned income, yet again benefiting pensioners and those living off rents at the expense of workers. Now, before I return to Alison Thulis' comments, one other comment that's been made by several observers today is that something missing from today's statement was actually released a month ago. Strangely enough, it was during the day when Vladimir Putin started his attack in Ukraine. It slipped out that the interest that students pay on their loans has increased. We read that a typical English graduate will leave university owing £45,000, and the interest rate they have to pay is going up. According to Richard Murphy and also Ed Economy on Sky, this is really like another indirect tax by another name. I should point out that while students in England have to pay the fee for each year of university, therefore adding up to their total debt of maybe £45,000 on average, a typical Scottish graduate will only owe £15,000 because they don't have to pay the university the fees every year. However, with inflation, again, this is back to the quote from earlier, inflation outpacing growth in nominal earnings, and with net tax rises due to rise in April, real living standards are set to fall by 2.2% over the next year, and that's the largest financial year fall on record. And that comes from the OBR, the Office for Budget Responsibilities. A 2.2% fall in real household disposable incomes per person would be the largest fall in a single financial year since the ONS records began back in 1956. Pensions also will rise by 3.1%, while inflation hits about 8%. Again, Alison Thulis pointed out in her speech in Parliament today that the Chancellor has refused to bring back the triple lock, which would have kept pensions in flight, in line with inflation or wages. Finally, in the Chancellor's statement, energy bills are set to rise by around another 40% in October. That's if wholesale energy prices remain as high as expected. The OBR, again, the Office for Budget Responsibility, warns that could push inflation to a 40-year high of 8.7% by the fourth quarter of this year. The cost of living hasn't risen as fast since the second oil shock pushed inflation into double digits in the late 70s and the early 80s. In the spring statement, the government is working to address supply issues such as the shortage of lorry drivers and the disruption to the transport of goods, which has led to higher costs and delays for businesses and consumers. The government makes no mention of Brexit as a possible reason for these delays. However, it does mention Brexit when Chancellor Sunak announced incentives to fit solar panels and other energy-saving equipment. He claims that this is a Brexit bonus because he's allowed to do things that he could not have done had we been in the European Union. And just before we move on, I'll return to that statement from Alison Thulis. She underlined her comments in the House of Commons with this press release. She said that the Chancellor's statement was a massive disappointment and a missed opportunity. The Chancellor has failed to get a grip on the Tories' cost of living crisis and completely abandoned those on the lowest incomes who will be hit hardest by the soaring bills. Under the Tories, the UK already suffers from the worst poverty and inequality in North West Europe, with the highest in-work poverty this century. But Rishi Sunak's budget did nothing to reduce energy bills, nothing to upgrade benefits in line with inflation, and nothing to reverse the £1,040 Tory cuts to universal credit. Ms Thulis went on to say, the majority of families will be hit by a toxic combination of Tory cuts, tax hikes and inflation, but the Tory government has offered next to nothing for millions of pensioners, disabled or unemployed people who will instead face real terms cuts to their incomes. While the SNP government has shown leadership by doubling the Scottish Child Payment and upgrading the 8 Scottish benefits by 6%, the UK government has failed to match this for the benefits it controls and has failed to use its reserved powers to boost wages and sick pay. And finally, Ms Thulis said, the Westminster crisis has been a decade in the making, and despite all the smoke and mirrors today, the fact is that millions of people will be hundreds or thousands of pounds worse off this year as a result of Tory cuts, tax hikes and failure. Meanwhile, for the Scottish Government, Kate Forbes, Financial Secretary, has said the Chancellor's spring statement has failed to address the biggest challenges facing households today. With soaring energy bills and a cost of living crisis, the Chancellor has not used the spring statement sufficiently to provide lifeline support that could prevent households facing fuel poverty. Ms Forbes went on to say the Scottish Government is providing a further £10 million to continue our fuel insecurity fund into the year 23, which supports people struggling with their energy bills. Most powers relating to the energy markets remain reserved, and the Scottish ministers have repeatedly called for the UK Government to urgently take further action in supporting households, including a reduction in VAT on household energy bills and support for those on low incomes. And Kate Forbes continued, we are doing all we can to tackle the cost of living crisis, including doubling the Scottish Child Payment from £10 per week per energy child up to £20 next month. The UK Government should have followed our lead and matched the 6% upgrade on social security benefits, which the Scottish Government is adding to the 8 benefits we control. The Chancellor failed to match our commitment, which could have provided lifeline support to hundreds of thousands of people. On taxation, Ms Forbes concluded, we have already acted to introduce a 19% starter rate of income tax below the basic rate, in line with our commitment to progressive taxation, which makes Scotland the fairest taxed part of the UK. We will continue to take that approach when we set taxation policy in future budgets. And I think Kate Forbes was referring to the fact that the Chancellor has brought English tax rates down to 19% for a starter rate. But of course, the Scottish budget was already announced last month. OK, we'll move on now to the story about the Ferguson Marine's ferries. Ferguson Marine must build a competitive business and deliver the 2 lifeline vessels, Economy Secretary State Forbes has told the Scottish Parliament. She was responding to an Audit Scotland report on the management of vessels 801 and 802 and the latest quarterly update from Ferguson Marine. Ms Forbes expressed frustration at the revised delivery and cost schedule for both vessels. Ferguson Marine have made it clear these delays and additional costs are due to the outstanding legacy cabling issues. The Scottish Government has accepted recommendations from Audit Scotland's report on Ferguson Marine as it's in public ownership. Ms Forbes said, "We knew the challenge we took on when the Scottish Government rescued Ferguson from administration in 2019, but it was a challenge worth taking on. We saved hundreds of jobs and we stand by our commitment to the shipbuilding communities in Inverclyde and our island communities that rely on the vessels. I have been crystal clear on what I expect from Ferguson Marine in terms of delivering the two ships, hull numbers 801 and 802, as well as turning the business around to be competitive. I recognise the critical nature of completing the ferries for the sake of the island communities, and I understand the urgency and necessity of delivering these vessels." And Kate Forbes went on to say, "I fully accept the Audit Scotland report's recommendations on Ferguson Marine and public ownership, and work is well underway on a number of the recommendations." Children's charity Aberlour will receive a grant of more than £5.5 million over this parliamentary term to develop 2 mother and child residential recovery houses. The houses will be designed to enable children of women with problematic substance abuse to stay with their mothers during their mother's recovery. Aberlour's approach to rehabilitation aims to deliver positive outcomes for women and their children. The first house, developed in partnership with Hillcrest Housing Association, will open in Dundee in the autumn of this year, 2022. The second house, located in central Scotland, will open in 2023. Each house will support 4 women and their children at any one time. Drugs Policy Minister Angela Constance said, "We are committed to improving the provision of residential rehabilitation services, and this funding will ensure that women using the new service provided by Aberlour receive support while being able to stay with their children. We know problematic substance abuse affects not only the individual but also those around them, including family members and friends. Keeping mothers and their children together can enhance the effectiveness of treatment and lessen any harmful impact on children." The Scottish Government is investing an additional £17 million to improve road safety in 22-23. This funding package is being provided to help deliver the commitments in the new road safety framework. The framework sets out a vision for Scotland to have the best road safety performance in the world by 2030, with an ambitious long-term goal where no one is seriously killed or injured on our roads at all by 2050. In the year 22-23, this funding will be deployed under a new Road Safety Improvement Fund, supporting engineering, research, education, marketing campaigns and partnership working, which will make our roads safer for everyone in Scotland. Minister for Transport Jenny Gilruth confirmed the funding allocation during Scotland's Road Safety Week in her speech to the annual Road Safety Conference today. Historic Environment Scotland, HES, has announced details of its summer events programme, which will once again see history brought to life at sites across Scotland, with the return of live events for the first time since the start of the pandemic. As part of the programme, popular family events such as spectacular jousting return to the grounds of both Linlithgow Palace and Claverlock Castle in Dumfries, as does the well-loved favourite, the Unicorn, at Stirling Castle. That's on April the 9th and the 10th, which celebrates Scotland's national mythical beast and features a variety of family-friendly activities around the castle. Also joining this year's lineup is a new exhibition entitled Unforgettable, scheduled to open in April at Blackness Castle near Linlithgow, celebrating the untold stories of people from marginalised communities whose lives shaped or were shaped by Scotland. Unforgettable highlights their contribution to the nation's history and was developed by HES to help celebrate Scotland's themed year 2022, the Year of Scotland's Stories. The 2022 programme also sees the return of popular events such as Celebration of the Centuries at Fort George near Inverness, which is HES's largest reenactment event, showcasing over 2,000 years of Scottish history. Also returning this year is Rock of Ages in Pier Park next to Dumbarton Castle, centring on the 800th anniversary of Dumbarton as a royal borough. The event will feature everything from the Vikings to characters from medieval times, with costumed performers providing a historical extravaganza, bringing Scotland's history to life in a series of demonstrations and displays. The 2022 programme provides a fun-filled opportunity to experience Scotland's past and explore its culture while making new memories and learning about the history of hundreds of unique heritage sites across the country. Alongside its events programme, as part of its Summer 22 activity, Scotland's lead heritage body is also once again offering £1 entry to its sites to members of Young Scot to encourage young people to experience Scotland's rich heritage. So that's our final story for tonight. So thanks for watching. I'll be back tomorrow and we'll see if we can get a guest on. The MSPs are all busy because Parliament is on a late sitting in Holyrood tonight, but we'll see who's free tomorrow. So it just remains for me to remind everyone that we are entirely paid for by subscriptions, and that might well be your subscriptions. So thank you if you are one of our supporters, and if you'd like to join that elite band of our supporters, please look online at the website below there. And it really would be great if you clip on the subscribe button, and whatever you could manage every month helps to keep us going here, helps to pay our own electricity bills, and hopefully as we continue through the summer we'll be making more programmes. Okay, so thanks for watching and thanks for your help. We really do appreciate it. So I'm Hugh Stewart, that's all from me tonight. I'll be back with Scotland at 7 tomorrow. Bye.